Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to This Week in FCPA, Episode 23, the Wells Fargo edition for the week ending September 23rd, 2016. In this week's edition, Jay Rosen and I riffed on the Wells Fargo scandal. We talk about the Fat Leonard US Navy procurement scandal. We discuss the new skin FCPA enforcement action. We take a look at Christina Muehl's two-part series on Mike Volkoff's blog site, Corruption, Crime, and Compliance on Third-Party Risk Management involving contract extensions and contract termination. Jay gives us some highlights from his weekend update. We lay out our wagers for the Texans versus Patriots game, which will be later on this evening. We provide an update on the SCCE 2016 Compliance and Ethics Institute, which will be held in Chicago this coming week. And we talk about the FCPA Blog conference in New York City, which will be on October 26th, and a discount given to listeners of this podcast. This is Tom Fox. I'd like to thank you very much for listening. I have one correction from last week's podcast. Filmcom is not owned by Telia Industries. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of This Week in FCPA, the Wells Fargo edition. Today finds me in Tempe, Arizona with my colleagues at the Red Flag Group, and as always I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Translations himself, Jay Rosen. Welcome, Jay.
Hey Tom, I get to ask you now, how's the weather in Tempe?
Humid, I can't believe it. I come here and it's humid. So it's raining in Phoenix. Unbelievable. I leave Houston and it's raining in Arizona. So go for it.
Well, hopefully it's good weather forecast for us in Chicago over the weekend and early next week, so maybe you'll get a break then.
Certainly hope so. So checked out the weather, and it could be as low as the mid-50s, so I'm looking forward to that. So Jay, we had quite an interesting mixed bag plethora of issue week come up, so I thought maybe we could just kind of jump into it. Dick Casson had a interesting piece on the FCPA blog. I don't know if you've been following this scandal. It's a multi-year scandal, and it's affectionately known as the Fat Leonard Scandal. It involves, unfortunately, our U.S. Navy and procurement, where a Singaporean-based defense contractor conspired with, unfortunately, sitting naval officers to defraud the U.S. Navy through procurement contracts. And what happened here this week was Singapore agreed to extradite, or ordered rather, the extradition of two of the defendants from Fat Leonard's company. And it's been going on now for multiple years. And basically, what the scheme was Fat Leonard and his company would low bid the Navy and get locked into sole source contracts and then jack up the prices after the contracts came in and were inked, and the corrupt procurement officers had given the contractor enough information to allow them to pull this off, and then would approve the overages on the fixed price contracts, or if they were pass-throughs, just allow them to go through. So this has been a huge embarrassment the United States Navy. The Pacific Fleet, obviously, with the pivot towards Asia, it's become more and more important. A geographic area away from Europe and perhaps even the Gulf of or Straits of Hormuz in the Middle East. So we're going to have to see how all this plays out going forward. What struck you from this week, Jay?
I just think every day you've done a great job really delving into the Wells Fargo thing, and I think last week I got on my soapbox crowing about the fact that it didn't appear that there were going to be any clawbacks, and it just amazes me. I know that sometimes our colleague Richard B. Strong has talked about, that there is sometimes this culture to succeed and this pressure to do your numbers, but it still it kind of astounds me that you've got 5,300 rogue employees, and then you've got the biggest rogue, who is the CEO, who gets up there and defends the fact that he's known about this for 2 years and hasn't done a darn thing. And he's both the CEO and the chairman. So I think there's so many ways we can go on this in terms of governance and in terms of, what there is out, what kind of pressures you have. But if you listen to Richard, and if we go back to that discussion that Roy had about that, the only one to blame for that was Richard B. Strong for what he did. And I don't know, in this case, I don't know if it's those 5,300 people are not the only people to blame, but it sounds like that they were in a hostile work environment, and that it was the only way that they could survive.
Jay, why don't we maybe save that one towards the end, because I think we may have to go off on separate rants on this for lots of different reasons. There were a few other things that popped up this week that at least caught my attention. The first one was we had another FCPA enforcement action involving the cosmetics company Nu Skin. And this one was unusual, Jay, because it was only the second time in the FCPA's 39-year history that a company was charged with an FCPA offense based solely on a charitable contribution, which was intended to buy the influence of a foreign government official. This was in Nu Skin's China unit, and Nu Skin had received an administrative fine from the Chinese Administration of Industry and Commerce of about $430,000. They approached a Chinese government official and offered to donate $150,000 to a charity he had formed. They made the donation. They apparently consulted the corporate office here in the United States and were given specific instructions on what language to add into the donation agreement, which had FCPA language in there. Somehow or another, when the final agreement was signed, the FCPA language was removed, and the Chinese business unit really failed to disclose, of course, that this charitable donation was being used to corrupt the Chinese government official and pay for a bribe. So we had an SEC enforcement action where Nu Skin agreed to pay $766,000 in a fine, $431,000 in profit disgorgement, and then prejudgment interest. That $766,000 was the total, and it made up the disgorgement, prejudgment interest, and the civil penalty of $300,000. So interesting that we see this a sole. It's rare that you see a discrete single event as an FCPA enforcement action, but that was the Nu Skin case from this week.
So if we read the tea leaves, what is the takeaway for the compliance practitioner about a sole isolated incident and the funds involved, that it's way south of $1 million? What do we take away from that?
Well, clearly you have to have a process in place, and when you have charitable donations outside the United States, there needs to be some fairly high-level scrutiny on this. That scrutiny was provided in this case. Nevertheless, it's still somehow Nu Skin China was able to get $175,000 of corporate money, which you and I both know how hard that is, to make a donation. And I don't know if there was no due diligence done on the charity, which would have identified the ownership interest, or at least the founding interest by the Chinese government official. But when you give away that much money overseas, you really have to go the extra mile to do due diligence, qualitative due diligence on the charity to see if the foreign government official or any foreign government official family member is associated with a charity. You have to have strong language in your charitable donation agreement specifying that the monies will not be used for any FCPA violative purposes. That was the specific language struck from the agreement that was referenced in the SEC order. You may need to make your donations over a period of time so that you can monitor the donations or audit, make sure they're given within the framework of what your donations are. So several different things that you can do, and apparently we're not done in this case.
But they tried to get it right, correct?
They tried to get it right, and they didn't.
And then one follow-on, which I didn't get in my reading of the facts. Do we know, did somebody come forward from the company, or how did the SEC become aware of this?
The order did not give us that information.
Okay.
So there was an interesting two-part blog post on Mike Volkoff's site this week, Jay, Corruption, Crime, and Compliance. And it was a guest post by a woman named Christina Muehl. And Christina is a senior corporate auditor at Delphi Corporation. And she wrote about a part of the third-party risk management process that really doesn't get a lot of play. So I wanted to bring it up, Jane, and we'll link to it in the show notes, because I thought it was certainly useful. And the two parts of the third-party risk management relationship you focused on were in the contracting phase, and it was contract extension and contract termination. And as I think you and most of our listeners know, there's 5 phases to the third-party risk management life cycle. That is business justification, due diligence, evaluation of the due diligence, questionnaire evaluation of the due diligence and its evaluation, contract execution, and management of the relationship thereafter. In that part, the last part, management of the relationship thereafter, that's where the rubber really hits the road, that you have to manage the relationship. And people understand what it means to manage a relationship in contract renewals, but they don't often think about contract extensions. And she said that companies tend to really not think through an extension of a contract the way they would of a renewal. And she said the starting point has to be ensuring that the extension of services is indeed in the best interest of the company and is well documented and made on solid business grounds. So it's some of the questions she suggests you ask are from the extension perspective. Are the services truly needed? Should they be outsourced? Are there any new or additional products or services? Is this the highest level of care and quality that's being delivered? Has the past experience proven this third party has proper business behavior? What's the total risk involved to your company here? And are there any new reputational risks which come up or have come up in the relationship? And then, Jay, she talked about contract termination. And I have to say, I really would not have considered contract termination in terms of third-party risk. But she correctly points out that even when a contract's terminated, you may have ongoing obligations under that contract. You may have to continue servicing under that contract. That third party may have to service your customers under the contract. So contract termination is just a fixed point in time. It may not speak to the full scope of the relationship between the parties, so that even though contract is terminated, it may not end the relationship. And I found that very useful for us to recall. So kudos to Christina Muehl and for posting or writing the piece, and then kudos for our friend Mike Volkoff for posting it.
It's certainly something that I don't think a lot of people look at. So it's those are 3 different types of outcomes from a contractual relationship, and definitely provide different outcomes depending on which way you go.
So Jay, why don't you give our listeners a highlight of the Mr. Translation's weekend update, and maybe lead into your thoughts on, or some more thoughts rather, on the SCCE.
Sure. So one thing I wanted to highlight, Tom had a real great podcast on earlier this week with Adam Turteltaub, who's business development people and a good friend at the SCCE. And we've been leading up to this for the past few weeks, but this is probably one of our highlights of the year to go to the conference. We're back in Chicago, and it starts off on Saturday afternoon. If anybody's listening, you can get into town early. I always like to participate in the volunteer event, and what's going to be unique on this one is we're actually going back to a veterans home that we've worked at before, and we've done yard work and putting in new plants and shrubbery and cleaning around. So it'll be nice to kind of reconnect with some of the folks who are staying there and to really get a chance to roll up your sleeves and get dirty. In terms of what Tom and Adam had to say in their podcast was that there's a lot more to attending Compliance and Ethics Institute than just going to the sessions and then rushing off at break to check your email messages. Some of the best people that I know and the best friendships that I've made in the ethics and compliance community have come from attending events like the SCCE CEI, and I'm looking forward to meeting up with old friends and making new friends. And along that line, I thought I would put together a list that of events that I'm planning to attend, different sessions at the conference. And as I was going through them, I noticed that out of the 10 sessions that I'm going to, that I definitely have personal connections with 9 of those presenters. So in only a short 4 or 5 years, I've really had an opportunity to meet some real great, knowledgeable people, and also had the chance to get to know them on a personal basis. So this weekend's read will be Jay Rosen's CEI dance card, and hopefully if some of you find some of these sessions of interest, we can meet up then and there. So that's the weekend read. And then on the FCPA, on the implications for Wells Fargo, I don't know. I think I haven't really thought through how well I feel about this, but I just really feel some outrage, and especially in light of 2008 and the financial crisis. I was reading some stuff today that I think was in one of your either blog 3 or blog 4, and when the CEO was up in front of the congressional committee having to answer questions on the fitness of Wells Fargo's underwriting, that just makes me shiver to think if all this illegal activity was going on and loading extra products, how close were you to a bubble again, and could 2008 happen again in 2016 or 2017?
Jay, let me back up a minute, because what brought this scandal to the fore is certainly not bribery and corruption. It's, not creating a safety hazard that leads to someone being injured. It's not the type of conduct that we typically see and would ascribe to a really clear level of intent. What we have here is a financial institution selling financial institution products and cross-selling those products. And frankly, I'm not offended if they want to sell those products. I'm not offended when my personal banker calls me up and says, Tom, we've got a new product. And I meet with my personal banker annually where we go over my accounts, and she talks to me about new products the bank has come up with. And is it marketing? Is it selling by her? Absolutely. But it's also maintaining a customer relationship with me, which I appreciate. And I know when I have a question, I can call her up, and if I'm having a problem with anything, that she'll take a look at it for me. So we have that. And then the second part, though, is equally unnefarious, and that's pressure to make sales. And Lord knows you've been in businesses where you've had goals, you've had metrics you've had to meet. We all have. That's if you happen to be in a business where you're not selling, it's because you're producing, and you're under pressure to produce. As a lawyer, I had to bill hours. And as a partner, I had to produce in terms of not only billing hours, but I had to generate business so that others could bill hours. So, we have something that's really part of the American capitalist system, or two parts of the American capitalist system, selling and then incentives or pressure to sell. And the question I've been sort of mulling over is, how did those two relatively benign topics or concepts become something that led to massive illegal conduct? And I say all that as an introduction to what I think is the best one sentence answer. And I found it in an article on Slate Online. It's an online publication by a Duke Law School professor named Samuel Buell, in a piece entitled "Prosecuting Wells Fargo's Executives Won't Solve Anything." And in part of this article, Buell said, "As is almost always true with big corporate scandals, the problem at Wells Fargo was not bad apples, but a diseased orchard." And Jay, that's really what struck me, was that there was so much pressure to sell that people actually had to cheat, had to break the law to sell. That's not selling to put money in your pocket. That's selling because your job is on the line. That's, and then let me put one other thing in front of you that struck me. Wells Fargo, before this happened, was the world's largest financial institution with a $234 billion market cap. Would you hazard to guess how much profit they made from this illegal scam? $400,000. Yeah, $400,000. And I've added up the costs that we know about so far. That we have the $185 million fine. We had reported $60 million in pre-settlement investigative and remediation costs, and $50 million reported 2 weeks ago as post-settlement remediation costs. On top of that, $6 billion in market cap. They used to be a $240 billion company. Now they're $234. $6 billion in market cap disappeared since the scandal. So for $400,000 in profits, look how much it's cost them so far.
That, unfortunately, is the story that we usually see. It's just really a shame that we were able to diagnose these things with a Monday morning quarterback perspective, and the shame of it all is there were lots of whistleblowers coming up, and it still wasn't enough to move the needle and get people to look at what the situation was and to see how bad this orchard was.
Well, in fact, that was one of the other biggest surprises to me. Was I thought this went on and somebody was just the switch and nobody noticed. Well, they've known since 2009. The company had been trying to get to the bottom of it. They'd done assessments. They had done internal investigations. They had done audits. They had retained SCAD and ARPs. I think PwC had looked at it. They had run employee surveys. Based on those results, they had put on training where you were specifically told, do not create fraudulent accounts, and the conduct continued. So when I saw that, that's what really led me to buy into Professor Buell's bad orchard theory, that when you have a fraud and illegal conduct going on since at least 2009, and I have to correct you or revise one of your earlier statements, the CEO didn't find out about this 2 years ago. He found out about it in 2013. And he took him a year to inform the board. So the board's known for 2 years. So you have this knowledge in a company, and nothing really is done to change the culture. But it's 400,000, and you're a $240 billion company. You're the biggest bank in the world. Is it really surprising nobody was paying attention? I guess I'm talking myself into saying no.
So who gets responsible for remediating this? Is this a FINRA thing? This is SCC? Is it going to be multiple agencies, or how do you see this playing out?
Sure. Well, they're a public company, so we've got potential SEC. Although profit disgorgement 400,000, gee, don't throw me in that briar patch. But we've got the Office of Comptroller, OCC. I don't know if FINRA would be involved because that's, I think, is financial services as opposed to financial institutions. I haven't seen any evidence that their financial services wing, those that were advising people on how to invest money, was part of this. This looked like just straight old credit cards, debit cards, car loans, the basic banking services. So I'm not sure if FINRA, the Department of Justice, could become involved, obviously, if criminal sanctions are levied. So there's going to be a Office of the Treasury could be involved. State banking regulators could be involved. I'm sure the state of New York will be actively investigating as they usually do. So there could be a wide variety of additional investigations going forward. But I just was so struck by the $400,000, and that's so. In tomorrow's blog post, I charted that out. That's $60,000 profit per year that they got for engaging in illegal conduct. I mean,
so this $400,000 on a $240 billion market cap company before we lost $6 billion, would this be metaphorically equal to somebody doing something to the air pressure of a football in a game in which they would win by over 30 points? Would that be a similar type situation?
I'm not even sure it rises to that level.
Okay.
I just, it might be the same as if somebody nicked one of the grips on the football. That's probably as much as it would be.
Okay, so no stickum.
No stickum.
No air pressure, but just a nick on one of the
grips. Yeah.
Okay.
That would be about.
So anyhow, I'm sure there will be much more that comes out about this matter, more for us to discuss from an ethics and a compliance perspective. In terms of a friendly wager, what do we want? What do we think about Texans and Patriots?
Well, you've got the top coach and probably all time for pro football. So if you're willing to bet against Bill Belichick, that's what it's going to take basically. And you've got the Texans who have lost every time I think they've gone to New England, certainly in the Belichick era. So you're going to have to give me a lot of points. That's all I got to say.
Okay. Do we want to put anything on the line here?
Well, I think we should do something. We can do our standard. Texans win. You have to take a picture of you wearing a Texans T-shirt, and we'll post it somewhere prominently.
And then, fortunately from you already have a Patriots T-shirt from previous bets.
I do. Although not with you.
I'm sorry, not bet. We don't want to imply that we are betting on the FCPA this week. FCPA, just a friendly wager between two gentlemen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're recording this before the game. We thought that would be the prudent approach. So we both hope that nobody else gets seriously injured. I guess that's about the best we can hope for.
Yeah, and then I think we are planning to do some podcasting at the conference. Is that what we're going to try to do while we're there next week?
Yep, we're definitely going to. I'm definitely going to be podcasting from the conference. I am doing a podcast with Roy Snell. We're going to record Unfair and Unbalanced in a public setting. So if you're listening, please see me and I'll get you an invitation to that. I'm also going to be asking people the following question: why are you passionate about compliance? So I hope that you'll give me a few words. I'd like to put a montage together. I think many of us in our profession are quite passionate about working in compliance, and they enjoy hearing why others are. So if you see me with a microphone, please do not run the other way.
All right. So thank you so much for listening. And this has been This Week in the FCPA for the week ending September 23rd. And the next time we hear from you and you hear from us, we'll be at the Compliance and Ethics Institute in Chicago starting Sunday evening.
Great. And look forward to the game tonight and seeing you next week, Jay.
All right. Take care, Tom. Thanks.
Thanks.